Hello, people. Welcome to the Deep Focus Show. I'm Aiden,
I'm Andrew.
and today we are continuing the Oscars series. In other words, going year by year and picking what films we would give Best Picture, Best Director, Best Actor and Actress, etc. to. And this episode, we're doing 1970 to 1974. So, kind of in general, what are your thoughts on this era?
It kind of bridges the gap between kind of that first wave of new Hollywood to full blown. We're in this era of the 70s with the kind of the auteur filmmaker, a lot of stylistic, artistic, but blockbuster movies, like movies that are very mainstream and popular at the same time. I feel like that's kind of where they're setting the stage for that. If you look at some of the top grossing movies of all time, they're starting to kind of trickle in around this like early mid 70s time period.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree. It's kind of transitional because we had a bit of like new Hollywood in like the late 60s, especially with like 1967 onward. This feels like more what people think of with new Hollywood, where you have like Coppola and Spielberg and Scorsese actually being very important names during this period of 5 years. This is a great period. Obviously, there's a lot of great films, and there's some kind of deep cuts that I think are really underappreciated, as well as some bigger films that I've kind of missed, but I still tried to kind of have a bit of everything represented on my list, at least to some degree, because yeah, I don't want to miss any really important ones. So yeah, I'll let you kick us off with 1970.
All right. So yeah, 1970, I feel like this was definitely the toughest for me in this batch. I mean, it strikes me as a leaner year in general for big movies compared to the rest of the ones we'll be talking about. I decided for Best Picture that I'll back the Academy with kind of the most epic film of the year, the biopic Patton, a long journey through the eyes of this general's career. Maybe it's maybe a bit overlong for its own good for me, but it's also bolstered by some strong performances, nice scope, good production value. For director, I went with Dario Argento, The Bird with the Crystal Plumage. This is a giallo movie, which were these like stylish mystery thrillers from Italy, kind of set the stage for what the slasher film would become later. And this one makes really great use of color, and there's a kind of like a really modern set piece in the home that's used to great effect in a climactic scene. Has a lot of creepy atmosphere throughout, so wanted to give that one a shout out. For screenplay, I'm giving it to Elio Petri and Ugo Piero for Investigation of a Citizen Above Suspicion. And going back to Italy, this is a kind of a cool Italian thriller, has elements of noir, satire, and what really sells it is the basic story. It's one of those like premises that is immediately intriguing. You have like a police official commits a crime, uses his knowledge and access to manipulate the investigation, and we follow kind of the twists and turns from there. So that's a cool film to check out too. For actor, I'm gonna go back to Patton with George C. Scott. He's pretty much always great in anything I've seen him in. It's not the first time I've picked him, I don't think, on these lists either. But here he's front and center. He put a lot into the role to embody the real general, and it's a memorable turn as like a volatile and hot-headed title character. For actress, I went with Carrie Snodgrass from Diary of a Mad Housewife. It's another one of those stories that points to the shift in Hollywood. Take the housewife role, but then have basically 90 minutes of people in this woman's life being awful to her. It's a performance that demands like a spectrum of emotions, patience in the status quo, and ultimately unleashing her frustrations as she keeps getting mistreated. I think she does a good job of not being too over the top with it and even bringing some humor into the situation. For supporting actor, back to Patton with Carl Malden, and he often brings a likable presence to his roles, and here he works nicely as this like more dignified foil for George C. Scott, having like a more measured approach to the fight and even moving up the ranks over him over the course of the film. For Supporting actress, gonna go with Karen Black in Five Easy Pieces. She plays a character called Rayette, the girlfriend of Jack Nicholson in the film. It would have been easy to make her mostly a character as like a pretty ditzy and uneducated kind of sidekick. But I do think there is more to her that makes her sympathetic and a little bit self-aware of who she is as well. And that rounds up my picks for 1970.
Great choices. I think we have no overlap, but great choices. This is a year I haven't seen some of the big ones. I've seen some other big ones, I guess, but in general, I agree it's a lean year, so it's kind of hard to get stuff. You kind of have to like look around, but I definitely did my best to pick some good movies. So for Best Picture, my choice is Waterloo by Sergei Bondarchuk as a great epic war film. David Lean made a film this year, Ryan's Daughter. I don't think that movie's that good. This is the type of movie he should have made this year. It's a pure epic with just great visuals, such spectacle. It's kind of hard to believe, and it just looks phenomenal. You have two great performances, one of which I'll talk about in a second, that anchor the film as Napoleon and Wellington. And there's a lot of just super strong set pieces, a great argument for why I love this kind of historical period piece epic. And that takes me to Best Actor. I'll go with Rod Steiger as Napoleon. It's such a cool performance. He's so like he's just got such a charisma, but also a creepy nature to him. There's something very kind of unnerving about it. And the way he plays off of Christopher Plummer as the rival General Wellington is really entertaining. It works super well. And kind of just you get all these close-ups of his goblin teeth grinning as he looks all creepy and stuff. And it's very trippy. For Best Actress, I'm going with Dominique Sanda in The Conformist, which just as a film, I have mixed feelings on, but I think certain elements of it are very strong, like, for example, the story, as well as some of the characters. I think it's a great kind of exploration of Italian fascism. It has a very kind of trippy visual style, kind of slow moving. I definitely see it as a big influence on New Hollywood, which is nice. Supporting actor, a guy named Thomas Milan in a spaghetti western called Compañeros, which is a movie I really like. I think the music's cool. I love the visuals. It has a really interesting plot and kind of some very cool political commentary. And Milan is always a lot of fun because he always kind of plays these anti-heroes in the spaghetti westerns, which I like. And I'll pick Iris Berben, who's also in Compañeros, as supporting actress. I think she does a good job as like the leader of these like revolutionaries in Mexico when the film is set. And the way, especially her character arc with Milan's character is cool and kind of not what you would expect. It kind of evolves in a way you wouldn't think. And the introduction with her character in the film is really strong. Director, I'll do Bondarchuk for Waterloo. Just the absolute staging is incredible. In terms of visuals, I could also make an argument to give it to David Lean for Ryan's Daughter, but the film is just far too long, far too meandering to merit the visual extravagance he attaches to it. So I can't give him that. And then for story, I'll do Bernardo Bertolucci for The Conformist because the story is a very powerful allegory and it has a lot of really fascinating parts, including the ending, which is really gripping and totally not what you'd expect. So yeah, that's my 1970 picks.
Nice. Yeah, you're right. No overlap. Guess we're covering the bases between both of ours, and we'll see if that continues. 71, I'm going to go with for Best Picture, The Last Picture Show, as well as giving it Best Screenplay to Larry McMurtry and Peter Bogdanovich. This is a really sad and nostalgic coming-of-age film about a group of teenagers basically growing up in a small dying town. And what's really unique is how it feels like it has one foot in terms of being a classic Hollywood production. It's black and white, it's a period piece, but it's also not so far removed from those to feel inauthentic. But on the other side, it's also very real with deep characters covering topics you just wouldn't have seen so bluntly covered in the 50s. I'm not sure you'd ever be able to replicate something that feels so vintage and old school at the same time, while also being so frank about language and sex and everything like that. For director, going back to Stanley Kubrick, Clockwork Orange. Once he got his career going, Kubrick really did not miss in terms of delivering memorable works across like really vastly different genres. I mean, probably the closest to each other are 2001 and A Clockwork Orange, just in kind of that dark sci-fi component to both of them. But other than that, like it's just set in completely different worlds. And this one's quite bleak and depressing. I'm not even sure how much I enjoy it in terms of a fun experience because of that, but it really translates the dystopia of the novel into really like a visually phenomenal film again, packed with satire too. And then for actor, gonna go with Richard Attenborough, and this is a film about real life serial killer John Christie, and he's really terrifying playing him. He has a quiet way of going about like his complete detachment to the well-being of others, and I think it makes it all the more disturbing because of it. Oh, I think I forgot to mention the title. 10 Rillington Place is the film. But yeah, he just really sends the chills in this role. When I knew him more for like Jurassic Park as a kid, this was really changed my perspective on what kind of roles he was doing. For actress, I'm going with Jane Fonda in Clute. She plays a call girl named Bree who gets mixed up in like the disappearance of a man. And in context, it was a remarkable performance, giving this type of character a level of depth and complexity not often seen before that. And I'm going back to 10 Rillington Place again for supporting actor with John Hurt. He plays Timothy Evans, who's John Christie's neighbor, and he gets wrongfully accused in the other man's crimes. And he's really great as the man who like finds himself in way too deep in something to get himself out of it. And it's really tragic when you consider that the story is based on the true events as well. And then for supporting actress, back to The Last Picture Show with Cloris Leachman, in a role for which she also won, I believe, plays Ruth Popper, who's like a lonely, depressed housewife, and she has an affair with a football star in the local high school. It's a challenging, emotionally draining role, and again, kind of speaks to that dichotomy between kind of the older aesthetic of the film with these very blunt topics. And those are my picks for 71.
Very good choices. I have a bit of overlap this time. Best Picture, I'm gonna go with Duck, You Sucker, also known as Fistful of Dynamite, the Leone film. Just totally operatic, amazing spectacle, has a political dimension, and it's just a true kind of, it's probably the last truly great spaghetti western, but what a great way to send off, and especially with Leone's next film going with the gangsters, it feels like he kind of realized he'd done all there was to do with this genre, and this is kind of the final hurrah, I guess. For best director, I'll give it to Kubrick, Clockwork Orange. You know, even though this isn't like my all-time favorite Kubrick or in my top three, almost everything he was doing during this time period was just instant gold. So it's very hard for me not to just think this is just totally assured production. I don't see any problems with it. Like it's at the point where like every decision he makes in each of his films makes total sense and is gripping. For story, I'll do Richard Matheson Duel, Spielberg's debut film. You know, a very important movie for this kind of era of movie making in the sense that it heralds the debut of, you know, one of the most famous directors probably of all time. And it holds up super well. It's super entertaining. It kind of, especially in comparison to Sugarland Express, which is not that good. And then he gets really good again with Jaws. So, and in some ways, this is kind of a precursor to Jaws in terms of the horror setup. So that's really fun. But the story is what makes it work because the story is what the whole movie rests on. And then for best actor, I have to say Willy Wonka with Gene Wilder. It's a classic performance for a reason because it has it has the element of nostalgia, but also just on its merits, he does a great job in terms of projecting in some ways like warmth, but in some ways this kind of uncertainty and like insanity with the chicken with the head cut off in the fucking tunnel. Crazy shit happens, but he's also a lot of fun, so it really works. Best Actress, a movie I've only watched recently. Jenny Agutter and Walkabout, which is an Australian film directed by Nicholas Roeg, is very good. I really like her performance as like a high school student who gets lost in the outback after her dad tries to kill her and her brother. A crazy plot, but it really works. So yeah, the movie just is very strong in that sense. It has great visuals. It is very gripping, and the performances are the most important part because the performances kind of anchor things with this movie, and it wouldn't work quite as well with less talented actors. Supporting actor, I'll give it to James Coburn with Duck You Sucker, which is kind of a co-lead with Steiger, but he's listed second, so I was just like, okay, whatever. I'll put him as supporting. Which I guess makes a little more sense. He's slightly less of a main than Steiger, even though they both are almost co-leads. But there's a lot of fun stuff with him. He has this silly ass Irish accent in the movie, which is obviously fun. And his role as like a dynamite expert is very pulpy, but it also has, this movie does a good job of balancing the light with the dark. So there's definitely a bit of grimness, especially with the ending. But I think it all works pretty well and it's very strong. And then I'm going the same with Cloris Leachman, Last Picture Show, supporting actress. This is a great movie in terms of the visuals, but it ultimately comes down to the performances because it's a very character-driven story. And you can kind of praise all of the actors, but I think she does an especially very good job. So yeah, those are going to be my 71 choices.
Well, I love your Gene Wilder pick, and I guess I'll say I had him in there
Yeah,
and then changed it, but it'll all make sense by the end of this video.
perfect.
So for my 72, I'm going with The Godfather. This is one of those films that's just like monumental, so it's probably going to dominate. So yeah, that's my best picture pick. Every gangster movie after this is indebted to it. Countless scenes, lines, moments in pop culture that are embedded in people's minds. Sprawling period piece, but more than its fair share of tense situations. It's technically great, has great performances, classic story, and so it's gonna sweep the film categories for me. Best director, Francis Ford Coppola. Best screenplay, Francis Ford Coppola and Mario Puzo. And then we'll jump right into the performances, and we'll keep it going with Godfather again, Marlon Brando. And the trickiest part here was sorting out who fell into which category, because the actual Oscars had Brando in lead and Pacino in supporting, when my instincts would be more the opposite, if anything. But there's probably still a case for both as leads. They're billed together. Brando has the title role, holds a massive presence, especially in the first half, and it's the role of a lifetime. So he's got to get it as like a transformative role, Don Vito Corleone. And finally, we'll break the streak. I'm going to go with Liza Minnelli for Best Actress in Cabaret. Uh, The Godfather was primarily a man's film, so obviously I'm looking elsewhere for the female categories. Cabaret is a musical set in early 30s Britain, or sorry, not Britain, Berlin. Sorry. She plays Sally Bowles, a performer at like a sleazy nightclub, and it's cool that a lot of the songs are able to be kind of more realistic using the cabaret setting rather than like the spontaneous song and dance of a lot of musicals. And Minnelli really brings out a lot of her character's emotions naturally via these performances she does. For supporting actor, we'll dip into The Godfather one more time with James Caan. I disagree with Pacino being supporting character, so unfortunately that kind of leaves him out altogether, but I can go with James Caan, who plays the brother Sonny, and he's very hot-headed, and he's great in his own right. And then lastly, for supporting actress, Shelley Winters and the Poseidon Adventure. This was like a pretty high profile disaster of an ocean liner that gets flipped upside down. Shelley Winters, she plays one of the passengers, now a recent grandmother who happened to be a former competitive swimmer. So her skills come in handy in the later going in the film, and it's one of the more emotional and physically challenging scenes of the film. And I like how she's kind of a non-traditional figure who winds up being a key player to help save people. And what's really cool is she does her own stunts for the role, learning to hold her breath for minutes on end. So that's also really cool. And that's winds down my picks for 72. I know it's Godfather heavy, but it was kind of a film that kind of stood above everything else. So I had to go with it.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of hard not to go that way. And in terms of my picks, like I tend to have a rule that I don't give awards to movies I haven't seen, but I haven't seen the Godfather movies, and it was impossible for me not to award like picture to Godfather this year. So I put an exception for Godfather both parts because I was like, I don't think I can maintain credibility if I give it to something else in like 72. So best picture, I went with The Godfather. I haven't seen it, but everyone, I,
Even if you have seen it in other things.
exactly. Yeah. The people can't be wrong about this. I refuse to believe it. If I watch the movie and it's like, I don't like it and I think it's like a 3-star movie, I don't think that's going to happen. But if it does, I can eat my words and blame myself then. And director Coppola, Godfather seems right. And I'll give that for story and screenplay with Coppola and Mario Puzo. And then for actor, I'll give it to Gene Hackman in Poseidon Adventure, which is a movie I also like a lot. I enjoy the disaster genre, especially this kind of massive 70s style disaster movie. They were so over the top that they kind of transcend the kind of silliness of their format in a way that's always fun. And then for actress, I'll do Maria Schneider, Last Tango in Paris. We watched this movie recently for class, and I enjoyed it a lot. I think Bertolucci for me is kind of more hit or miss, but this one was definitely more hit, even though it was still had some problems. So it was mostly very strong though. And also Brando was also in it, which takes me, I had kind of the same thing where I picked Brando for supporting actor for this because I always kind of thought about the movie that way, even though I hadn't seen it. The way it was kind of always advertised was that like Pacino was kind of the lead and Brando was the kind of like colorful, supporting character, which I'm not sure if that's really true, but it seems kind of right. So I'll give it to them for that. And then supporting actress, I'll say Natalia Bondarchuk in Solaris. I kind of mixed feelings on Tarkovsky, but this movie definitely has strong elements, even if as a whole it's not really my favorite. And her kind of performance in this kind of psychedelic space station is definitely very cool, and I like that. So yeah, I'll give that to her for this. And I think that wraps up 72 for me.
So 73, this was another big one for me. Maybe my favorite of these years in this 5-year stretch, possibly. Best Picture and Best Director, William Friedkin for The Exorcist. This is phenomenal horror film, in my opinion, that it also is like, one of the biggest films of the decade. It really caught people's imaginations. I think the secret is that it takes itself seriously as a drama too. There's like a police procedural element to it. There's a medical thriller component, and then the supernatural stuff that is so often parodied too. But it's all really well done. Audiences at the time, I don't think they're prepared to stomach it half the time, but now I think you can appreciate it more as like an artistic work that's really well paced, really compelling, and also marvel at the really groundbreaking makeup and effects work. You can't really talk about a possession movie afterwards without thinking how it has something to do with The Exorcist. And then for screenplay, I'm going with David S. Ward, The Sting. And so this is one I haven't seen in full. I almost saw it a week or two ago, and it just didn't happen. But I know way more than I'd like to about it, anyways. Without getting further into it, I'm disappointed it couldn't have been more of a surprise because of how much this kind of script is my jam, but I really love a good heist film too, and I love a good big twist. So definitely going with that for screenplay. And for actor, I'm going to give that to Al Pacino, Serpico. If you thought I'd pick him in this batch of years, you might have assumed it would be for the Godfather films. And I wouldn't say he's necessarily better than in those, but he's really great in this and a very different role as a whistleblower. And I tend to think of thriving in a more morally compromised roles. Like I think of how he thrives in those. Here we've got him as more of a passionate figure in the face of like the corrupt system around him. For actress, I'm going to give that to Tatum O'Neal in Paper Moon. And I initially, again, thought about putting her in supporting actress because she actually won for that, and partly due to her age as well. But at the end of the day, she's in almost every scene in the film, and she's a central character. The film is really great, and most years I'd really try to give it more representation. It's a story about a young girl who loses her mother and teams up with her maybe, maybe not father to grift people on the way to her remaining family. And she brings like a feistiness, curiosity, and charm to what is a very demanding part for, and I think she was 9 at the time it was filmed. And then for supporting actor, Max von Sydow, The Exorcist. Makeup team did a real great job there, and making me forget he was only in his 40s in this film. It looks just how I see him in much later roles. He plays the senior priest heading the exorcism, brings the right amount of like gravitas and dignity as a man remaining stoic with a horrific scene before him. Again, another movie that's dominating the year for me, but it speaks less to the strength of the year and just how much I like the film. Supporting actress Linda Blair in The Exorcist, and there was a bit of controversy over this win. I think, given the demon scenes, it was another actress dubbing her voice. But I really don't think that takes away from her contributions to the shocking performance. Movies about possession aren't likely to go into the brutality from such a young character. And it goes without saying that this was the film that every other was trying to catch up to from then onwards. And like Linda's role was at the center of it, has the distinction of being also the first person mentioned in the series who I've actually met. So that was cool. Met her about 10 years ago. And those are my picks for 73.
Great picks. I think very strong year, lots of different types of movies. And yeah, so I guess to just get into it, my best picture choice, I'm gonna go with Badlands, the Terrence Malick debut film, a great kind of visual combination with the music and the characters. Very, it sets the stage for his entire career in terms of movies like Thin Red Line and Days of Heaven later on, which will probably also either be picks or very strongly considered for them. And it's a movie that I think is one of the most self-assured kind of directorial debuts out there in terms of nailing the style right out of the gate. That's really cool to see. And yeah, enjoy that a lot. In terms of story, I'm going to go with Dalton Trumbo for the film Papillon, which is a movie I like a lot. I think it's with Steve McQueen, Dustin Hoffman. I think it's a really strong prison escape film, very entertaining, but also has this epic grandeur to it that is very appealing to me. I like all of that. Director, I'll do George Roy Hill for The Sting. I really like this movie a lot. I think it's very strong, one of the best of the year. I prefer Butch Cassidy of the films with Newman and Redford, but this is very close. It's a tough call. They're both very good in their own ways. Best actor, I'm gonna go with Elliot Gould in The Long Goodbye. Just a great noir, so atmospheric, such a cool tone. Obviously, he's playing the Philip Marlowe character from movies like The Big Sleep, but it's so different here that it's almost a totally different vibe. It feels kind of like a precursor to movies like Chinatown, which will be next year. So has that kind of 70s washed out feeling to it. And he kind of holds the film together with his performance. Without it, it might kind of go off on the rails a bit. And then for actress, I'll do Sissy Spacek for Badlands. I mean, she's kind of like the main audience surrogate focus of the film, even though Sheen is also a really important part of it. But she's kind of the most important because you see the whole story through her eyes, and it's important that she kind of has an innocence to her character, but there's also this kind of eerie, morbid fascination she has with like death and with destruction throughout the film. And that's very interesting. I enjoy that a lot. For best supporting actor, I will do De Niro in the Mean Streets because, you know, that's kind of the start of his screen legend, I feel like. It kind of starts there, and then Taxi Driver is what really makes him like an all-time actor. But I mean, I think you can already see the start of him as this kind of just force of nature. He steals the show, and you can see why Scorsese wanted to make him like the one actor he puts in everything after this. And then for supporting actress, I'll align with you and I'll do Linda Blair for Exorcist because I agree. It's very impressive that you have, you know, I agree with you that like in terms of the focus of the film, she's kind of the focus, but at the same time, the focus is also kind of on the other characters. But still, the film doesn't work without that, without her part of it, you know. And you know, Friedkin is it's very sad that he died recently because you know he was one of the great new Hollywood directors in a way between this, French Connection, many other movies. So it's like, you know, this was, and this, you know, maybe French Connection is more highly regarded, but this is definitely one of his big, like, classics, if not his most famous and kind of acclaimed movie. So definitely wanted to represent that one a bit. And yeah, those are my 73 picks.
So last one, 1974. Probably not a surprise. My pick for Best Picture again, Godfather Part 2, often considered one of the greatest sequels in film, and it pretty much picks up on the artistic vision of its predecessor. There's more of a political aspect to this one, and we see the culmination of what Michael's character arc in the first one leaves us with. I don't think it's quite as loaded with the moments that everybody knows as the first one, but it really makes an impact on repeat viewings and belongs as part of like this one like 6 hour story between the first two films. I'm going with a personal pick for Best Director, Toby Hooper, Texas Chainsaw Massacre. And with this project, it was almost hard to know where the line between artistic vision and happy accidents, like where one started and one ended. But the production was apparently an awful experience for those on set. On the other hand, I think there's too many like brilliant elements that go into the final product that I can't help but give so much credit to the creative choices. The film's deranged and carries in like an uncanny sense of dread, and the way it handles certain scenes is so out of step with the cliches of other horror films of this type. It's like an exploitation film, but if it was done masterfully, and you see like a title like that and think it will be like a low grade splatter film, but what you get instead is really like chilling, tense descent into like this nightmare scenario. And I'll cycle back with Godfather Part 2 for many of the reasons I stated. I just think it really carries that first story into the second and brings it into one nice grand epic. I mentioned before about your Willy Wonka pick. Here is my Gene Wilder pick for Young Frankenstein. I wanted to represent him. I thought it might have been overboard to take him for both years instead of The Godfather, but here he is here, and like I knew he had this coming somewhere. Despite like all the marquee dramatic performances, he's just so funny in this that I really need to give him the credit. It's like a spoof of the old Universal Frankenstein films, and he's basically playing the grandson to the original Doctor, and eventually basically succumbs to the madness himself. And I don't know if anybody's ever made like a more hilarious turn, raising his voice just like he does frequently throughout this film. Like the scene where he convinces his associates to lock him in the room with his creation, only to almost immediately panic and convince them to let him out. It's just a perfect comedic scene. And then for actress, I'm going to go with Faye Dunaway in Chinatown. This is a cool role because she's kind of a modern update of the femme fatale, and there's like an air of mystery and tragedy to her character, and she draws it out throughout the film. And then for supporting actor, John Cazale for The Godfather Part 2. He had a fairly small role as Fredo in the first film, but his turn as the weak-willed brother to Michael really stands out here and includes probably the most haunting scene for me of the second film. And then to wrap it up, going back with another personal pick, Young Frankenstein again. Madeline Kahn is supporting actress. She's great in both big Mel Brooks films this year, but I really like how she parodies the female roles in those older Hollywood films here. She's like superficially glamorous, but in a really fussy way. And sometimes she'll like drop her facade altogether for a stray line. And it turns what could like can often be like a bland archetype into a really great comedic performance of its own. And those will be my picks to close out the first half of the 70s.
Great picks. Probably year we have the most overlap. Best Picture, again, I haven't seen it, but I'm going Godfather Part 2. You know, it's just like, seems hard for me to believe a sequel to have this much hype, even winning Best Picture. It must have done something right, you know. So very kind of easy call there, and I will watch these movies at some point. Best Director, I'm also going with Toby Hooper, Texas Chainsaw Massacre. I think it's one of the iconic horror films, one of my favorites ever. I mean, just like the grit and kind of the sleaze of this one. Obviously, it was shot on 16 millimeter instead of the traditional 35, which is a really awesome choice. He stages some amazing scenes, like the iconic meat hook scene and the ending with the truck driver, as well as just some really insane violence. The opening is super strong. There's a lot of themes about kind of like animal abuse and like the meat industry and stuff like that that are very kind of interesting if you think about it. Story, screenplay, I'll do Coppola and Puzo for Godfather Part 2 in the way, you know, they were able to build off of this first film and do something totally different with the follow-up, going back and forth between the two stories. That seems very impressive to me. Best actor, I'll do Paul Newman, Towering Inferno. This is same director as Poseidon Adventure, and I prefer this even as a disaster film to that one because this one even further ups the stakes. It goes from like 2 hours, this time it's 3 hours. There's so many characters, so many actors, insane plot, you know, just this like massive building. It's based on two books about a burning building. It combines characters from both books, which is just insane. It's like, what movie would do that? That's ridiculous, but it works. Actress, I haven't seen this movie, but I wanted to shout out Gina Rollins in A Woman Under the Influence. Kind of Cassavetes is a big blind spot for me, but everything I've heard about him, and especially this movie, highlights this as like one of his highlights as a director and one of her highlights as an actress. I'm really excited to kind of delve more into him because he's a director that I think I sadly have missed too much by, but I want to rectify that. For supporting actor, I'll do Robert Shaw in The Taking of Pelham 123. Really classic heist film. I think very influential on a lot of things. It kind of reminds me a lot of movies that like Tony Scott would make in the aughts and people like that. Very strong. It has a great interplay between Walter Matthau as this hero, as the like investigator, and Robert Shaw as the villain, the bandit who's taking people hostage, which is very cool. And he's just so ice cold in this role as the villain. You know, kind of reminds me of him in James Bond from Russia with Love. His performance there as Red Grant, like he just has this ice cold villainous charisma that's so much fun. And then supporting actress, I'll go with Faye Dunaway in both Chinatown and again Towering Inferno, but especially Chinatown because the role as this updated femme fatale, but with the added like trauma of John Huston's villain in this is just very, very strong. It works super well. It's a great counter to like Jack Nicholson's kind of more traditional noirish protagonist. It's those kind of layers that make Chinatown stand out as a more kind of thematically gray film noir, I guess, and as an update for it in kind of the morally gray, paranoid 70s. So I think very strong pick, and very strong year. Just a good crop. 73 is my favorite. I think same thing as you, but 71 is pretty close and just a lot of great movies throughout. So yeah, got anything else to add?
That's a great pick with Robert Shaw there. I probably would have been my second choice there, and I don't think there's going to be a pick that'll make me happier that we lined up on than that Texas Chainsaw director pick. But so that's
Such a perfect
very,
movie.
like,
Yeah.
yeah. And who would have thought that would be the movie where we line up? But I
Yeah.
love that you agree.
No, that one's just that's a movie like it's not even my style of movie really, but it's totally for what it's going for, like I can't even argue with it. Like there's just it's so strong. Yeah. So thank you everybody for watching. Comment, like, do whatever in the comments or whatever you want to do to support the channel. And thank you so much for watching. See you next time.